Welcome back to Lokad TV. The skills required to excel in supply chain have evolved dramatically in the last 20 years and will continue doing so for the time being. None of this, of course, is news to today's guest. Joining us remotely from the Rotman School of Management, Associate Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management, Paul Yan. Paul, welcome to Lokad.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, Paul, I said welcome to Lokad. Bit of a misnomer. I mean, we're already very familiar. You've collaborated with us for a while, and in fact, you've visited us here in the new offices in Paris. But for people who are not familiar with your work, could you give an introduction, describe your background, please?
So I thank you for having me. My name is Paul Chen, currently a professor at the University of Toronto, teaching operations and supply chain analytic courses. So I come from a industry background with the extensive experience in consulting and also in the corporate America industry, and spent the last 15 or so years in both mixture industry and consulting, and now teaching, sharing my knowledge and experience with all the students here at U of T.
And how long have you been teaching at Rotman School of Management?
So I've been at Rotman for about 4 years, and before that was with the University of California, Irvine. So in total, I've been teaching for about 7 or so years.
And how has how have the courses on supply chain evolved, even just over that short time frame?
So here at Rotman, I teach a foundational class, which is an introduction to operations and supply chain management, and that's where students learn the foundational theories, the applications, and some of the practices. And I also teach another class which is in collaboration with Lokad, and that is to take those theories and practices and put it into action with a company. What I have to say, over the years, there are more and more data that exists from a company's ERP, and even from mid-size, even to smaller businesses, they all have some sort of a data capture or ERP system. So data has become more prominent, and students, from what I observed, they lack the confidence, the experience in how to apply what they learn in school to the real world.
Well, and Joannes, I will come to you in a moment, but I just want to follow up on that. Because you do have extensive private sector experience, when you're describing, or rather when you're selecting the foundational theories to teach students, how much of that is, let's say, traditional supply chain knowledge, and how much of that is influenced by your extensive experience?
So in the foundational class that I teach, I don't have a lot of room I need to follow a syllabus and the requirement that's set forth by the university and the department. So most of those are the traditional theories and models that the student will learn. And what I do is I supplement anecdotes and stories or things to watch out for as a supplement to the students when they go into the workforces. But as a requirement from the school, the traditional theories is what they will learn in that class. And in the other one, in the collaboration with Lokad, that one I had the freedom to apply more of the teaching from a practitioner point of view. So in terms of being aware of variabilities, being aware of the financial bottom lines, which on a financial bottom line perspective, the traditional theories don't so much account for that. But in practice, executives will be looking at what is the financial impact for doing XYZ. So that is the difference between the two, and how I apply my experience to these different classes here.
Well, thank you, Paul. And now, Joannes, to come over to you at last. On that note, could you describe what exactly the collaboration is with Paul as part of Lokad's broader education?
Yes, Lokad, we started an initiative about a year ago to make our technological stack more broadly available So basically, Lokad comes normally as an enterprise piece of software, which is only accessible to our, I would say, VIP prospects and clients. And what we have done is to repackage that as what we call a playground, which is a slightly simplified version of Lokad, accessible at try.lokad.com, which give access to a coding environment powered by Envision and a small file system. And in terms of educational purposes, the idea is to have to set up a series of workshops where students can actually take a data set that is, I would say, a simplified version of what is found in actual setups, but still, I would say, a fairly representative data set. So we didn't want to make the task too easy and too theoretical. So it's and the idea is that we can provide a ready-made environment where the student can directly start with a data set and a small challenge of a supply chain task that has to be executed on top of this data set. And this reflects the sort of challenges that people can have when they enter a company where there is, let's say, problems with suppliers. You need to analyze and figure out who are the suppliers who are not be able to deliver on time and in full, or you want to forecast the demand, or any other of those, I would say, supply chain analytical tasks. The idea is that Lokad wanted to provide an environment to do that. The reason being that students who study supply chain materials are not software engineers. So yes, if you were asking a classroom full of, I would say, future software engineers to do that, they could take the time to set up a Python environment, to set up their own data pipeline and parsing logic and whatnot, so that they can actually work on a data set using, let's say, open source technologies. The problem is that considering the sort of time frame that we have for students who are not software engineers, but actually supply chain engineers, or future supply chain engineers, they need to have an environment that is like ready for a workshop that is primarily about supply chain, not about the intricacies of how do I parse a CSV file in Python. So that sort of things need to be like readily prepared. And that's what we can do with this environment, to share an environment where the data has already been prepared. The script, even the script that reads the data, is already written, so they can directly jump into the meat of the problem, which is figure out what to do with the supply chain data, with the supplier data, with the demand data, etc., and apply, I would say, supply chain reasoning through a programmatic tool. So our ambition is to let those curriculum that are typically very light in terms of technical tools do things that are more advanced, but without being completely bogged down into, I would say, pure technicalities. So bottom line, we provide an environment that could be replicated, no problem, in 5,000 lines of code of Python. That's very much doable. But the problem is that if you do that, then suddenly you cannot expect to do a fruitful 3 hours work session with your supply chain students. You will be doing a 3 hours pure coding session where you will just figure out how to parse a CSV file, which is not very interesting from a supply chain perspective.
And Paul, just to follow up on this, I mean, how radical a departure, or how challenging, I should say, how challenging are these engineering skills, like coding, for the average foundational level student? Sorry, a foundational supply chain student, excuse me. So people who might not have a mathematical or engineering or programming background.
I can give you a real world example where we started the semester here a couple of weeks ago, and I would just say, maybe 20% maybe this new class has some sort of prior coding experience, but in that they had taken, for example, Python in the classroom setting before. So majority has not. So when they come in, I think they're excited because they realize that this is a skill that's will benefit them greatly in the future, since a lot of things there's a lot more data, and Excel is cumbersome when it comes to analyzing such a large amount of data. So coding, it helps simplify this process. But they, at the same time, they are also, I think, scared, kind of, worried because they don't have the experience, and it's just a bit of a, like they are just, a bit worried in the back of their head for the majority of these 80% of students. So it's a very important skill now, but it's also something that's lacking in the training of the business students, not just supply chain alone, but business students in general.
Well, thank you. And that actually transitions perfectly, Joannes, to something I've actually been waiting a long time to ask, and it's a perfect tee up. You've described in the past, in your lectures, you've described supply chain problems as being wicked. So there's two parts to this question. One, what exactly do you mean by wicked problems in supply chain? And two, following on what Paul just said, why are tools like Excel just not equipped to deal with these wicked problems? So 2 parts.
So the notion of wicked problem, that doesn't come from me, other people. It's basically problems that defy direct first level analysis. So it's something where it has to be a journey no matter what, where you will discover the problem itself. Mm-hmm. An example of that is what is a good ad. If I ask you what is, I give you a geometric surface and I say, please compute in square inches or square centimeters what is the surface of this shape. This is like, the shape might be very complicated, so the calculation might be difficult, but it's a very close problem. So there is like an analytical solution that will give you either the direct exact answer or a very, very good approximation to this answer. It's like a close problem. Mm-hmm. No? But if I tell you about what is a very good ad, the answer, it really depends. And it also depends on what your competitors are doing. For example, if you decide to do a fantastic ad, you manage to do, by random chance, something that turns out to be a fantastic ad, but then your competitors copy you so much that your ad, which was brilliant, has now become completely undifferentiable from all the competition. Suddenly, it was a very good ad, but it became a bad ad just because everybody had copied it. So you see, that's the sort of, the wickedness is that the very answer that you give can potentially undo the answer itself. That's kind of weird. I give a very good answer, and because it is a very good answer, it is copied. And because it is copied, it becomes a bad answer. That's a sort of wicked problem. So in supply chain is full of wicked problem. You decide to put a distribution center there to outcompete somebody else. This somebody else decide to replicate and respond by by rearranging their own distribution centers to outcompete you. That's the sort of thing. So things are not stable. An answer is not, those wicked problems are problems where they are competitive in nature. There are people that respond to what you're doing. This is the opposite of a problem like, give me the surface of this geometrical shape, which is a type of problem where the answer do not depend on what the rest of the universe is doing, what other people are deciding. This is well isolated. And then you also have problems where you're not even sure that you're framing the problem correctly. What does quality of service mean? I mean, yes, we can say that quality of service is about increasing the service level, but the reality is that quality of service is in the eye of the client. And what does it even mean? It's a very, very difficult question. It's for some people, they might think that if there are substitutes, it's okay. They are not expecting this one product to be available. Maybe if they are substitute, they are okay. Some other people might disagree. They might have a very narrow conception of what they actually need, and they say, I want exactly this barcode or it doesn't work. So again, and then if you, depending on the messaging that the company has, so the broader communication, you might actually amplify or diminish whether people see other products as substitute or not. If you have a communication that says this thing is completely unique, there is no substitute whatsoever, then don't be surprised that people are not even willing to take other of your own products as substitutes, because that's your communication. that might be good against the competition, but that can be more challenging if then you want to convince people to accept, to go for alternatives. Again, situations are incredibly varied. So bottom line about those wicked problems, and that's a typical thinking of Lokad, is that usually when you have those wicked problems, it's better to, even if the problem is wicked, it's better to be able to iterate over the problem with data as opposed to operate without data. No matter the question that is being asked, like, is it a good ad? Well, it's easier to answer this question if you can measure the sales and correlate a little bit with your advertising spending, for example. It doesn't mean that it will solve the question entirely, but it will still, you will be more informed as opposed to just trying to answer this question without any data. So usually, even if you're dealing with a wicked problem, having data around helps. The problem is that due to the wicked nature, you need to be able to revise your position on what sort of analytics and processing. It means that there won't be like a one-for-all answer. You will process the data, and then you will think, and then you will maybe ask a slightly different question, depending on what is happening. So wicked problems, that's where we come. You need, when you're facing a wicked problem, having data is good because it lets you be more informed, which is generally better, but it also means that you will need to repeat your analysis from time to time because, again, there will not be a definitive answer. Excel is good in this respect. Excel lets you revise your analysis as frequently as you want. The problem is that Excel do not scale to the extent that modern supply chains require. I mean, nowadays, we are talking of tens of thousands of products, millions of transactions, a lot of transactional data. Excel is just not suitable for that. That's the key challenge, is that modern supply chain data exceed what can reasonably fit into Excel. And it exceeds, I would say, in two ways. First, it exceeds in number of lines. Excel is limited to 1 million of lines, but this part is not actually the big problem. In theory, Microsoft could re-engineer Excel a little bit and make it extend to 100 million lines. That's not impossible. And actually, there are a few competitors of Excel that can do that. But this is, when we say it exceed, a modern supply chain exceed, is that fundamentally Excel is one table at a time mindset. So it assumes that data is like a flat one table. But the reality is that the transactional data as found in a supply chain, it's multiple tables. So you have a table for supplier, a table for, let's say, transactions, a table for clients, a table for products, a table for, let's say, colors or shapes or whatever. So you will very frequently end up dealing with, let's say, at least half a dozen of tables. And so what you're lacking is something that, like a relational algebra, which is really at the core of your transactional data. Your data in supply chain is transactional, so and relational. So you have like half a dozen tables, and that's where Excel do not really work. Is that not only you have these constraints on the number of lines, but this could be fixed, by the way. But more generally, you have this problem that you're limited. In terms of semantic, Excel does not give you this multi-table thing. And by the way, this is due to this reason that is much more profound, that Microsoft isn't even really bothered into expanding this 1 million limit. Because the people at Microsoft, they know, and they have known for a long time, that even if they can expand to 100 million lines, the next stage will be, oh, we need several tables, and then it's not going to work very well with Excel. And that's why basically the answer of Microsoft was, if you want relational data, you have SQL Server, or you have tools that takes relational data as a first-class citizen, as opposed to try to have that into a spreadsheet. And by the way, this is also something that we are trying to do with this playground, is to expose students to this reality of relational data by offering a language that has like relational data as a first-class citizen, because that's something that I believe is not going to change. 40 years from now, ERPs will still have like tables and columns. This thing was established like 4 decades ago, so it has been like a very, very stable aspect of the digital supply chain for more than 4 decades already.
Well, actually, Paul, an interesting point to follow up there on, because you have extensive background in the private sector and were formally trained in this field. when you were sort of coming up and developing your experience, I presume you worked with Excel. And if so, at what point did you say, I need to consider richer, more programmatic options? So what caused the divergence from Excel?
The divergence is what Joannes alluded to before, is that Excel is great, it's one table at a time. And it's very cumbersome to link all these tables or tabs within Excel. And even if you're successful in doing so, it's also another very time-consuming task if you need to change your assumptions, variables to double-check, right, all the changes that you have made in Excel, and you often run into error, like you almost often make mistakes at the end because you forgot to change, this variable there or this assumption there that which caused the end result to look a bit different. So I think it was maybe a couple years in that I had the chance to learn SQL. I didn't know SQL before, but I learned SQL in one of the projects, and I, really appreciated the language and also the power that how much you can process and simplifies at least the first part, the finding the descriptive data, trying to find the anomalies within the data itself, making sure the data is clean, and where I can integrate, different data sources together. That really simplified things quite a bit. And that's when I really made a transition that, at least at the time, SQL would be my first choice of the analytic tools that I would go to process, if you will, pre-process the data, to understand what the data looks like, and is there any anomalies, and then doing maybe the first descriptive type of analysis from that. And Excel would be more just for the ease of the visualization, right? Once that's complete, then we will visualize it easier with Excel by doing the charts and graphs and stuff like that. I do maybe add on to what Joannes mentioned in discovering Lokad, which I also would mention. I discovered, or I found Lokad a couple of years ago, but I did not with a similar initiative as the one that I took last year, to introduce this to students. But I was afraid. I mean, it must be honest that the coding aspect would deter students from using the tool and from enjoying or learning from the class. But I must say, I was wrong. Given the past couple months of our collaborations, I discovered Envision is a very easy to understand tool. Even given I have some programming and database background, so it's very easy to understand, and I think it's also easier for students to understand because the codes, you can read it sort of like a layman language. So different from, for example, Python, others, where you sometimes things may not make so much sense, and they don't follow one to the other without the explanation of someone who's or the coder who wrote the program. So far, it has been a very helpful exercise to introduce this. It really simplified the process of adjusting for assumptions, like things that we may not have accounted for in the data, but to update that in the code itself and then reflect it in the dashboard for the student to see. And that's really I think at the I still call this an introductory level, right? Like for students, is for them to understand from a high level, from a top-down standpoint, that what is a company doing, how is it doing, right? From these descriptive data, such as number of customers they have, the highest sales, the ABC trend of their products. Right? From there, to understand how they set up the supply chains, and then we dig deeper into their supply chain from there. So Envision, having this program, this coding experience has really helped dramatically from that aspect. Yeah, and also reduce the errors that we may make in Excel.
Well, again, and I'll follow up actually with you, Paul, and then Joannes, I will come. It's a philosophy question. You'll like it. So it occurs to me that we've talked about the tool. So Envision is the tooling, but using or leveraging tooling comes with a mindset. So, and as you just alluded to, and something that is the foundation of what Lokad does with Envision is taking a purely financial perspective to supply chain problems and reducing dollars or euros of error. This is it's a mix, I guess, of economics, but it's also a little philosophical, understanding, well, if I do this, I can't do that, opportunity cost. And so in terms of the mindset, understanding how to use these tools, is that something that you also have to teach in the class, or do students just automatically understand, oh, yeah, opportunity cost, I'll just use this tool, and it's really obvious to them?
I think it's obvious. I shouldn't say it's straightforward obvious, but students have had trainings in economics, so they understand what the trade-off, the opportunity cost is. And even in the foundational supply chain class or operation class I teach here, we do introduce students to the access costs, salvage costs, the different costs that may come with depends on the decision that you make, to how much you stock in terms of inventory and when. So these are understandable, I think relatable to students once you explain to them that the way that we come up with this financial bottom line is based on ABC. Then if you let them know the ABC and they have the prior experience from either economics or the foundational supply chain class, then that would make sense to them. I think practically, in practice, these financial bottom lines is what we also try to quantify for executives on any sort of consulting projects. So executives understand that, when you tell them this is your cost in dollars or opportunity in dollars. But for the supply chain folks, I would say, or operations folks, I think they are because mostly driven by the traditional metrics, the turns, forecast accuracy. So those they understand, but they don't. I think they can relate to the dollars, but they pay more attention to that. So there's a bit of a gap between what the executives understand and what in practice in the field, what the operational folks, or at least they are, I guess, educated or instructed to follow. Yeah, from a student standpoint, because they have learned this in their foundational classes, so introducing or telling them or explaining to them these concepts is not a difficult task.
Well, thank you, Paul. And Joannes, back to you. So again, builds on what's just been said. I perfectly understand why things like Python, SQL, and obviously Envision, it's our domain-specific language. I can understand why all of those tools, they're new, supply chain practitioners might not be familiar. But the concept of scarce resources, alternative uses, the bedrock of economics is more than a century old. So why would that aspect of the economic mindset be so different in supply chain circles versus, as Paul just described, it being intuitively understood in the classroom?
I would like first to bounce on a remark of Paul. When you were saying you were worried about using Envision, I think you were right, because just for the audience, my personal belief is that the vast majority of enterprise software is complete crap, literally complete crap. And purchasing software, I'm just looking at you. So And so it is understandably, it is a very, and here I can feel the person that was from Accenture, that was like years of experience with those enterprise software where it's just like pure hell. So I think, it is very, very reasonable assumption to assume by default that it's going to be pure crap, and then be pleasantly surprised if it turned out to be not the case. But I think it's a reasonable assumption. I firmly believe Envision is not in this camp. We did a good job, but again, I think it's by default to expect that enterprise software is going to be very low quality, especially compared to popular open source projects, is a fair and very rational assumption to be made about the applicative landscape. So that's just a tangential remark where I believe that people who have been working for a couple of years at companies like Accenture, they would get this sort of things ingrained in their instincts, and it's actually valid.
Tangential and candid.
Now the thing with this sort of mindset with the financial thing, and when he mentioned ABC as in activity-based costing, by the way, not ABC analysis.
Of course not.
So the thing is, it is my experience and my theory is that it is very difficult to think about problems if you cannot imagine the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, when people say people want to think in terms of accuracy or service level, this sorts of very classical metrics. The thing is, if all you have is an Excel spreadsheet, that's pretty much, I'm simplifying, all you could implement. Thus, if you can only think in terms of spreadsheets,
mm-hmm.
and then you have a struggle to go for those things because it needs you to think of problems, how am I going to turn all of that into dollars, while you have a really hard time to think about the solution. People would, that's something that surprised people, but my instinct my theory is that in practice, people always think solution first, problem second. You see, it's very hard to even state a problem where you cannot conceive the solution. You will first stumble upon an approximate solution, and then you will, when you want to explain what you've done to somebody else, you will actually invent the problem that matches the solution. But people start instinctively imagine the solution first, and then in order to be able to communicate about that, they invent the problem. And by the way, this is kind of the same thing in science as well, but that would be a very big digression. So bottom line is that your capacity to think solutions depend on the tools that you have available, that are available in your mind, that you can manipulate in your head. So if you have Excel in your mind, then all the solutions that you can think of are the stuff that can work in Excel. And thus you're kind of stuck with the paradigm of accuracy and service level, because that's the sort of things that you will be able to do in Excel. And that I believe that's why it's very important in terms of foundational courses to familiarize students with, better sort of tools where they can think, for example, with tables and columns and the concepts, for example, with SQL. The problem is it's not that SQL per se is so important. SQL is irrelevant. You could pick any other language that does the same thing. But with SQL, what you get is a paradigm that you have tables, filters, aggregations, columns, value types like string versus number, those booleans, those things are very, very important. And suddenly, when you have those paradigms, a table, a field, a filter, suddenly you can think of classes of solutions that are more elaborate. And suddenly you can start thinking about that, because you see, those things about those financial indicators, what you have in practice to think about that, they're not very complicated, but suddenly you need, I need to connect the cost of storage. So I need another table that will give me some assumption about the cost of storage. I need to have the cost of stock out. So, okay, we need to have somewhere else, we'll need to have this information. And we have all this list of costs. It's not that people, traditionally are idiots and incapable of thinking the cost of storage or the cost of insurance or the cost of this and that. They know it, they're not idiots. But when it comes to imagine the solution, if Excel is all they can think of, it's very hard for them to think the spreadsheet that will be able to plug those 20 different things in a spreadsheet. That's kind of a monster spreadsheet. But if you can think with relational data, then suddenly you have the tools the paradigmatic tools that let you think, okay, I'm just going to plug all those costs with as many tables as it takes. And conceptually, if those costs are individually simple, it's just a matter of aggregating all of that. There is no grand complication, except that you need to understand that you can ventilate all those data across many tables, and that's fine. So you see, that's where I think where suddenly the sort of paradigm shift is that the tooling, understanding what a better class of tools can do, lets you imagine better class of solutions and then better class of problems. And that's a long solution, but that's also, I believe, why traditional supply chain management is very hesitant, is that they didn't have the chance to get this sort of education where they can really think of with more modern tools, like literally, I mean, when I say more modern, they're not very modern. I mean, databases are like relational database as we understand them. They are 4 decades and a half old. So it's not exactly, brand new technology. It's like old technology, very established technologies. But nonetheless, it takes time for all of that to permeate companies. Nowadays, it has completely permeated companies in the sense that pretty much any company beyond $20 million turnover has an ERP or something that lacks an ERP as a backbone for their supply chain. It doesn't exist anymore in North America or in Europe. Company of this size with no digital backbone. But now the supply chain management needs to be a bit some familiarity, and then once they have that, I believe that these sort of things will connect the dots much more readily, because again, they have some familiarity with economics, they have some familiarity with those problems, the financiarization of the supply chain, and when they can connect the dot, then they will see that those sort of tools let them execute this sort of thinking with not too much overhead.
I was just thinking, I completely agree with the Joannes assessment, and I was thinking that if in today's world, if we were to do a competency assessment, I guess, in just pick any company and the supply chain operational folks, I think you'll find a big gap right there in terms of their understanding of what we just talked about. And that's really I think in educating this next generation of young professionals or going to be professionals, that about a mindset, right? To think differently, and we have different tools, and that innovation really broadens the quality of our ideas. Right? We're pushing the boundary, and they can think broader, right? Better, I would say, than versus the Excel that you're limited to, again, one tab at a time. And I think that's...
and by the way, I've been teaching personally, although I was not teaching supply chain, I've been teaching for 7 years. I was teaching distributed computing and software engineering. And my philosophy when I was teaching, and at the time I was very fortunate because my university, the École Normale Supérieure of Paris, gave me at the time, was giving me absolute leeway in what I was teaching. So you could say that they could not care less, as long as I was keeping the student busy for a certain number of hours. But the bottom line is I had pretty much complete freedom to decide. And with that, my primary criterion was always to think, I need to teach something that 4 decades from now will still be relevant. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this is kind of challenging, because when you're teaching software, my biggest fear was to teach something that was just a fad, something where 5 years down the road, you realize, I was teaching that was so much a detail, something that didn't matter, that was just a technicality, and it is now gone. And so my approach was to always ask myself my question: is it something that will stand the test of time, that 40 years from now has a very, very good chance to still be, a point of importance, and that's where I think that should be a primary criterion. For example, when I say SQL, the good thing is that SQL has been established as a standard since essentially 1989. yes, there has been like a series of evolving standards, SQL 1992, and a few further revision, but the bulk of it has not changed since, and now we are talking has not changed for 30 years. And the underlying model, the relational data, it has not changed since the late 70s. So, and it has proven incredibly successful. Virtually 99% of the ERP market is using this relational data format one way or another. So even if there was like a sudden revolution, 40 years from now, there will still be the majority of the ERPs, just because it will take so much time for people to migrate out of this paradigm. And that's not even happening yet. So that's the sort of things where I say we have things where it's not, I mean, people have the impression when we say digital technologies that it's changing all the time, that it's something where you have to learn something and 2 years from now it will be gone. And I believe that's a bit of a problem, that it's the wrong message, because it gives people the impression that this knowledge is kind of disposable. And the problem of that is that also it gives a false impression to the management, to existing management, that they can bypass that and they don't care. In 2 years, it's going to be something else. I don't care. Why should I actually invest my precious hours on that? Although 2 years from now, it's going to be gone due to the next version of ChatGPT or something else. And my take is that if it's done correctly, we have plenty of subjects that are very, very, I would say, fundamental. Relational data structure would be one of them. The basic data types, text, Booleans, numbers, those basic data types were already like that at the end of the 70s. Even Python 3, the latest version, they still have that at their core. It's not like, it's like something that is very, very unlikely to change over the course of the next 4 decades. And similarly, for example, if we think about forecasting, the idea of what are how to think about the future. Time series, yes. What are the limitations of time series? What a time series forecast gives us, what are the limitations of that? What it doesn't give us? What this thing cannot give us by design? That's also an interesting question. It's not going to change. So the most basic sort of forecast 4 decades from now will still be a time series forecast per day, per week, per month. And the limitation of such a forecast will still be the same. So that's interesting, is instead of, for example, if I had to teach, I never taught, at university supply chain, but if I had to teach forecasting, instead of focusing on what is the best time series forecasting model, which is going to change, what are, the sort of built-in assumption that you have with time series forecasting, what it gives you and what it do not give you, and the intrinsic limitation and how to think uncertainty, this sort of thing. So that's the sort of things where there is an opportunity to have an answer that will stand the test of time. But I understand, it's a very big challenge. Plus, most university professors did not have like the super luxury that I had, where the administration didn't care in the slightest of what I was actually teaching, at least for the fine print.
Well, that actually, again, that's getting into demand forecasting, or that dimension of supply chain management. That's an entire video in and of itself. But Paul, when you're covering demand forecasting in class, do you get into probability distributions, understanding the uncertainty of the future?
In the foundational class, we talk about it, and also in basically in demand management, so forecasting and inventory management. But I have to say, it's a blessing, I guess, in a way. Just let me finish. Blessing in a way that we make it is in the classroom. We make the assumption that all these variabilities, uncertainties follows a normal distribution, which is a traditional method. It makes things a lot easier to teach. Trying to explain the uncertainty in lead time, in demand during the lead time period, in a more detailed way I can see it's confusing to students, especially in the foundational class. So having to do that is great. To say, okay, it just follows normal distribution. But I had to say, in applying the probabilistic approach, which you look at the probability of the lead time variations throughout for a product, for SKU and stuff like that, and you can graphically look at that, right, in through the dashboard, for example, visually. It makes things a lot easier, right? People are visual, so they can understand, oh, this product behaves differently than that one, and this is why. Versus in a classroom, a foundational class is, I'm just drawing graphs on the blackboard or on the whiteboard, for example. But now there are real data and real results, and they can see in front of them, so they visually understand. Okay, now I cannot just assume everything follows everything is normally distributed, right, across the entire products of this company. Yeah. So I will add that after maybe this semester, I'm going to bring some content from the upper class down into the lower class as a way to explain uncertainties and variations in a more visual way.
But you see, the interesting thing is that making, I would say, crazy strong assumption for teaching purposes is fine. I mean, I remember when I was at university as a student, a teacher that was teaching physics of mine, he was doing things like, okay, we are going to do a calculation about this cow, and we are going to assume that this cow is a sphere. Obviously, a cow is not a sphere.
Nope.
And so if you do a kinetic calculation with the sphere, and the good property of the sphere is that it makes everything simpler in terms of calculation. And it's obvious that the cow is not actually a sphere. But for the sake of the exercise, it is reasonable to let people, students, do a much simplified calculation, because you just want people to experiment with the concepts without being bogged down on the calculation. So I think that's completely fine. And as example, and the example done with, let's say, the cow as a sphere, it's fine. And car manufacturers do not assume that people in cars are spheres or that cars are spheres. They do the right things. If they have to do a simulation for security purposes, safety purposes, they will use a software that let them do something that makes sense, not those crazy wild assumptions. The thing that is kind of bizarre in the supply chain world is that people do the equivalent when teaching that cows are spheres, which is, for example, demand is normally distributed. Again, this is a fair assumption for teaching purposes. This is just kind of insane in the real world. But then the enterprise software vendors just go with that and say, you know what, we are going to have those spherical cows hard-coded into our software. And then I say, this is madness. Cows are not sphere. Don't hard-code that into an actual software. And it's as if, General Motors was hard-coding assumption about spheres and passengers in their cars. And people would think, who in their right mind thought that it was a reasonable assumption to assume that every passenger is a sphere, that the car is a sphere, and it's going to collide another car that is also modeled as a sphere? People would think this is nuts. You should not do that, not for a real car that is going to drive on the real road. And yet, the super bizarre thing is that for enterprise software in supply chain, software vendors would say, yeah, no problem. We are going to have spheres, service levels, normal distributions everywhere, and everything is fine. That's a bit my reaction, and that's so that's why I have this sort of, I would say I understand, where you're coming from a teaching background, but I also see the status quo in this industry, which is a little bit nuts, and where I see the problem. There is a need for disruption where people need to engage a little bit. It seems that in other industries, let's say computer-assisted design for industrial things, people are not making are not translating those crazy assumptions that are introduced for teaching purposes into the software directly. But in supply chain, for some weird reasons, it seems that they do. And so there is like a need for a spark or disruption so that people, I would say, this industry as a whole stop doing that. But maybe it's not the responsibility. Maybe it's not fair to demand that from professors. Maybe the problem is that it's the supply chain enterprise software themselves, the vendors themselves that need to come to terms with the reality itself.
Well, actually, that's something I was just about to ask. And because I could perfectly understand from Paul's perspective, again, Rotman School of Management, you teach a course on this. It's your responsibility to teach these concepts. But for Lokad, I mean, bottom line, we're a supply chain software vendor, yet you've done, I think, 35, almost 35 really detailed supply chain lectures. Each week we produce long form articles. We have experts on to talk about these concepts. Why is education such an important thing for a private software vendor, in your opinion? Like, why focus on this so much?
Again, if I can bounce back on the wicked aspect that you were mentioning very, very early on, supply chain is, I think that's probably one of my biggest grip with the way it's usually presented. People in books, supply chain books, and consequently most supply chain software, they present it as if you had very simple problem statement, like I have, and then there was like very natural analytical solutions as a consequence of those very problems. Like, let's consider a case where we have a future demand that is normally distributed. The lead time is normally distributed. What is the optimal inventory policy? Oh, great, optimal inventory policy. And then they offer proceed with an analytical solution that provide the provably optimal answer to this problem statement. And my grip is that it is not, supply chain is a collection of wicked problems due to the fact that we are putting together all the forces of the companies. You know, by definition, the supply chain is gluing the company together. So it means that we are putting sales, production, transport, marketing, everything, you know, finance, everything together so that there is like a unified execution of whatever the company intends to deliver. That's what supply chain is about. And this is not a simple proposition. I mean, people have incentives of their own. This is a large company that we are talking about. So they can be, you know, bastions inside the companies. You have cliques, you have difficult behaviors. Then modern companies, they don't operate over one country, they operate over many countries. So not only you have sales versus marketing, but you can have France versus Italy versus Spain. And if you have like one factory that happens to be, let's say, in Spain, you have an arbitrage. Where do I send the materials? Should I send the stuff to be sold in Spain, France, or Italy? And this arbitrage means that if you don't sell enough, if you then send enough to a country, they won't necessarily be able to achieve their targets or achieve, you know, sales that are as good as they could have been if they had been allocated a bigger portion of the production. So there are plenty of things where in supply chain, there is no easy answer, you know. And I think that's so. If I have to go back to those wicked problems, is that on the surface we have a lot of problems that looks just purely analytical, demand forecasting, inventory optimization. On the surface, it looks like that. If you go a little bit deeper, you will realize that a lot of those problems comes with loose ends, a lot of loose ends that are very difficult. For example, if I say I can discount my products to get rid of the other stock, very good. I discount my product and then I sell more. I do a promotion. I sell more. I liquidate my overstock. That's very good, very simple. The problem is that there are two costs. One cost is the cost of the discount. So I'd give $1 of discounts. So okay, I forfeit a bit of margin. That is easy. But then there is the second order problem, which is if I do a discount, I am telling the market at large that discounts, promotions do happen. And my clients, who are not idiots, they remember. And thus, because they remember, next time they will wait. They will wait to see if I am not just about to do a promotion, and they will adopt an opportunistic behavior to wait for me to do a promotion.
So by selling more, you're basically inculcating adversarial behavior.
So yes, you're creating an adversarial behavior. And so it just means that you have a second cost to factor in, which is the bad the bad will as opposed to the goodwill that you're creating when doing something. Again, it's better to be approximately correct rather than exactly wrong. As part of your supply chain practice, you need to embrace these sort of things, that these sort of things happen. you might not be able to do a very fancy analysis of this pattern, for example, of the fact that you're creating bad will by doing certain things. But if you don't take that into account at all, what you generate are stupid decisions. Even if they are very sophisticated, that will be like the seventh idiot decision. The solution that is supposedly optimal, but in practice, it's an idiotic decision. So my take, so if I go back to these wicked questions and things, my take is that supply chain, if you want to approach it, it is a whole series of wicked questions by design, though by the very nature of supply chain, connecting together a lot of conflicting interests inside the company and outside the company. And thus, we need to think in terms of paradigms, of tools that let you embrace those wicked problems, even approximately. And that's where I think there's a lot of things that are wrong, is that people, instead of going for the approximately correct, but correct, they go for the exactly wrong, and they double down with a lot of numerical recipes that are way more precise than they ought to be. That you do something that is the degree of sophistication, I would say, is completely disconnected from all the elephants that you're ignoring on the side. That's my probably biggest grip, both at the theoretical level, so the supply chain textbooks, and then what happens with most software implementation by mostly our competitors.
Well, Paul, I think we're kind of winding down a little bit, but I do want to pitch it back to you. I don't know how Joannes' conception of supply chain sounds to you, but to me it is a deeply philosophical perspective on supply chain. Again, when we talk about first and second order problems, it's almost like Wittgenstein. And I'm curious, c'est vrai ça. And my curiosity is, do you take a similarly deeply philosophical approach to supply chain?
Does the administration even let you?
Yeah, on day one. We need to is the cow a sphere or not?
Supply chain philosophy is 101.
But to be fair, that is very much the mindset when you talk about paradigmatic shifts. Paul, is this the sort of thing you tell students? We need to rethink the wheel completely, or is it more gradual?
It's gradual and also, I guess, disruptive. I guess I'll use these two terms. Gradual in that in university, as someone's learning, they wouldn't do the foundations. They wouldn't do some intermediate supply chain operation management class, and they come to maybe a more advanced class that I'm teaching this semester in collaboration with Lokad. So in those, right, they would then gradually learn of these maybe traditional theories, applications, and so forth. But then the disruption comes, when in this class, is that, at least in my experience, I don't know how to teach students these the wickedness in supply chain, for example, without them experiencing it. So that is the other component of this class, is that we work with a company, and that's why I emphasize a lot. We work with a company. We had to see real data, and from there, adding with a tool, right, you can combine the two. So they see the wickedness, they see the uncertainty, they see the things that they maybe learned the prior 2 years or 2 classes. Some of it is, I cannot apply it straight away. I cannot just apply service level or some other calculation just right out of the book. Right? It would not. You can do it, but it may not make sense. And so I think it's both, right? So and then without the experience, I'm not. At least I'm still exploring. Without that experience, I don't know how to introduce that wickedness firsthand to. So it is a philosophical question. I agree.
And by the way, this is an open problem. And if you go to the Wikipedia page on wicked problems, all the disciplines that are facing this sort of wicked problems, so problems where you have like interactions where essentially a good or bad answer to a problem statement depends on what other people are doing. So you have like adversarial behaviors that goes into the mix. They are those disciplines are incredibly difficult to teach. I mean, it's not specific to supply chains. There are other areas where it's just incredibly difficult. And there are even areas where, for example, we had a guest recently about, let's say, trading, trading on public markets, yes, with Peter Cotton, where if you even reveal how you do it, you undermine your own solution and your own revenue stream. So secrecy is paramount in those sort of things. If you understand something, you should professionally not talk about it, because if you talk about it, then people will use that against you. So yes, that's the sort of things where, I mean, it's just very, very difficult, very difficult. And but anyway, that my take is that Lokad will keep trying. We'll keep trying, and we will keep trying to support the good universities who are at least like the University of Toronto, trying to go in this direction. Because again, we don't expect any solution, but any step, any Microsoft taken in this direction is already something better than just pretending it doesn't even exist.
Approximately correct.
Yeah, exactly. Approximately correct. Again.
Well, Paul, it's customary here to give the last word to the guest. So is there anything you'd like to tell people about or advise your students on for finals?
No advice on finals yet. But I think I would, maybe in conclusion, circle back to Joanna's comment that, or your question about why private sectors are investing in education, something like that, where you invest in lectures and articles and blog. And I do appreciate that. And I think, many of these students graduate, after they graduate, I think the vendors, suppliers, these websites becomes their source when they're trying to find, information, or trying to understand what supply chain management is, for example, or refresh their memory. Then, I think all these content becomes very relevant to them. And I think especially also you can tie in, since you are a company also do project with other companies in the world, you are able to tie in experiences, and that becomes relatable to them. Right, so then I think something like, for example, like statistics is I find it very fearful, I think, subject for students. So then even talk about, like I go back to my earlier comment that just assume everything's normal makes things a lot easier, because it takes that fear away. But if you have, something, as I mentioned also, you have these real substance to substantiate there are different behaviors, then they may be more willing to learn to overcome that fear. And then, after university, then it becomes, because our information is not public, but your information is, so it becomes more accessible to them, right? So it becomes another also a reinforcement in, getting us out of this mindset that we can, apply the same, I guess, solution to all the different wicked problems.
Well, perfect. And on that note, I don't actually have any more questions. Joannes, thank you for your time. Paul, thank you very much for yours and for your ongoing collaboration. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.